I'm going to tell you about a fun little component of a larger project that we've got going. The work I'm going to report today has been done in Laos, and my co-authors here listed include Michelle Roberts, who's a PhD candidate in the US, who was working in Laos for a year and who worked with me on this photo voice exercise, and Sang Tong, who was our research assistant. And Sang and I made this presentation, more or less the same PowerPoint, in December at a wrap-up meeting of another project that we associated with. And so I thought it might be interesting to present it here and discuss this idea. The bigger project that we're doing is to try to develop a tool for monitoring livelihoods at the village level. A kind of an idea of getting low-cost, easy to collect information about livelihood status that could be used both by local people, but also by projects and by governments to monitor the progress of a development project or a conservation project, with the idea that getting people engaged in that process is really important for a number of reasons, because we think that that engagement will help to develop more effective project design in the first place, but also provide more accountability and engagement over the longer term, so that the people who are the intended beneficiaries of that kind of a project will be able to have some say in how well it's working and have some feedback on the ongoing management of the project. So what we'd like to do is find ways to get local people engaged in thinking about development, what they expect, what they want to happen, and to feed that information into a project design and monitoring process. So, I mean, the basic idea of the participatory monitoring is we want to encourage low-cost, efficient information. We want to facilitate local engagement and capacity development. And we want to get local values and aspirations into these conservation and development activities. So in Laos, we're working with in an area that's close to a conservation area, a new national park. But there's also a big government-led land use planning program going on. And in Cameroon, where the other component is being done, it's a national park, and a big change in the way people have access and rights to use resources in the park. What I'm going to talk about today mostly, though, is this tool, Photo Voice, the idea of using participatory photography as a way to engage people in those discussions. So we did Photo Voice workshops in 6 villages, and my presentation is going to talk about how we did it, what we learned, and give some reflections on how the method worked. Photo Voice it's a relatively new approach. There's been a lot of work done on participatory photography. One of the first ones that I'm aware of was some work that was done in China, in rural areas in association with an IDRC project, but it was primarily used for advocacy purposes. One of the most famous ones is one called, a film that was made called Born in a Brothel, where a Canadian woman actually distributed cameras and taught photography to children of prostitutes in Calcutta. And then they used that photo exhibition, they toured the world and used it as a way to kind of publicize their life and their ideas, and to use it as an advocacy tool for raising money for support for some of these kids. And there's been a number of projects along those lines. But one of our students at Royal Roads, Greg Spira, did his master's in communication, and he used participatory photography in Bolivia as a kind of a rural appraisal tool. So I met Greg and learned about his work, and I thought it would be really useful in some of our projects. So together we did a project in northern Manitoba where we used participatory photography to, the purpose was really to try and engage local people from the Cree and Métis communities around the Pas to get their ideas about development and expectations. And it really, I found it a really useful tool, and one of the things that really convinced me was kind of a little anecdote, I think, that will show you why I liked it. On the first day of that workshop, we had the group came in, and the kind of self-appointed spokesman was a very big woman, probably in her early 50s, tough character, and she started, her opening statement was, "I don't know what we're going to do here, but one way or another, I know we're going to get screwed by the white man." So it's an awkward start to a workshop. But when we finished, at the end of our 3 days, she said, "You know, my people sometimes have something to say, but they have a hard time saying it, and this allowed us to say it." And it really was an endorsement for me of the approach. So I thought it would be interesting to try it in Laos. So what we want to do is get people to record and reflect their ideas about community issues, strengths, and concerns. We want to use it as a way to promote dialogue and information sharing within the community and with other stakeholders in a process of development. And we wanted to use it as a communication tool as well, remembering this idea of photo voice as an advocacy tool. And I'll talk about how we did that later. This is where we are working. So there's Laos in relation to Thailand, Cambodia, China, Myanmar. You can get the sense of the general area. And then that square is more or less outlining Luang Prabang province. And within Luang Prabang province, we were working in these 6 villages. There's a few photos here just to give you an idea of the landscape. That's kind of a typical village. This one has road access, but no electricity, no plumbing. There's only one of the villages that actually has a on-the-grid electrical supply. The landscape is very hilly. There's not a lot of flat area for agriculture. You can see that these hills have all been deforested probably several times over in cycles of shifting cultivation. So they would plant dry rice on the hillsides and some other agricultural commodities. They allow the forest to come back, and then after a few years, 10, 15 years, depending on the population density, would cut and create a new field again. And then a picture sort of from one of the villages, just to give you an idea of the housing style. And there's different villages or different ethnic groups, but this is kind of typical. We did workshops in those 6 villages. In total, we had 89 participants. We tried to get an even gender balance. And what we did was we went to each village. We spoke usually to the village head and explained what we were trying to do. They're familiar with the project because there's a larger research project going on looking at overall land use planning. And we said we wanted to get groups of people who would be willing to participate. We tried to get a group size from 10 to 20, and then we varied it, and that's one of the things I'll talk about, the different sizes. We tried to get a gender balance. We tried to get a balance of ages in these 4 categories. And we tried to get people from different skill categories. So we wanted some people who were traditional healers, NTFP collectors, farmers, and so on. When we got the groups together, we would use the school or the village hall if there was one. And we would start by explaining the purpose. I spent quite a bit of time talking about photography as a tool for communication. I talked about what we were trying to do with it and tried to give some idea of some of the benefits that we thought they would gain from it, and especially the idea of providing an opportunity for them to give their ideas into the development process. We also showed a video that Greg made from his work in Bolivia, which was really effective because it allowed them to see life in a different place where they had no exposure whatsoever, and it allowed them to see kind of how it was used in that other place and get a sense of what they were about to do. So that was a really great way to start the workshop. Then we did some training. I had small digital cameras, little Nikon digital cameras, and we gave basic training in how to operate those cameras, but also in photography. And I'll show you a few pictures sort of to give you an idea of how that worked. The training in photography wasn't to try to communicate any kind of a Western aesthetic, and we deliberately tried to avoid that, but we wanted to talk about how you can change what you say with perspective, with the way you use focus, with angles, and so on. So this is some of the training exercises. So this is Sang, one of the co-authors, and this is Michelle, the other, on the bottom here. Here we're just sort of showing people the cameras and how they work. In this particular village, in every village we started off by asking people if they had ever taken pictures before, and usually, as expected, the answer was no. None of the people we worked with had experience using cameras. In this particular village, nobody, or quite a few people, especially these women, didn't even know what a camera was. They had no idea how a picture was made. And so it was a pretty big jump in sort of technological awareness and learning curve. This is the work we did with kind of getting an idea of photography, and we had a bunch of photographs from magazines sort of grouped to show perspective or focus or different aspects of photography. And these were really very effective discussions where I asked them to look at these pictures and say, what is it telling you? What is this picture communicating? Is there another way you could have done it? And we got some really interesting and good discussions around that. And I think that helped people then to think about what were they going to do with their own photographs. Then, once people were comfortable with how do you use the cameras, we did a few rounds and just the rest of the technology. We had laptop computers. We had brought with us a generator because there was no electricity. We had a projector, a small projector that could run off that generator. And we had a small inkjet printer so that we could make black and white photos for some of the later discussions. So we did a couple of rounds of tests. We uploaded photos, let people see what they were, and then we sent them out in several rounds with one question each round. And so the first question was basically just to go out and take photos that represent what is important to you about the natural resources in this place. And people came back, we looked at the photos. Each photographer was asked to select two that they really wanted to present, and then they were to present those photographs and explain what did it mean to them, why did they take that picture. As we progressed, we then got more specific with the questions. We asked them to say, what would you like to see change in your village in the next 5 years? What would you like to see stay the same? And then we had some questions about traditional beliefs, that was something that Michelle really wanted to do because it was one of the focuses of her anthropology PhD research. And so each time people brought back their pictures, looked at the overall set. Some people came back with hundreds, some people came back with a few, but each photographer was asked to select two to present, and then we would present and discuss those photos. So in the first round, they were presented on the projector, so that we had colorful size images that the photographers were able to talk about. We had really nice discussions about those. And then after the whole, the several rounds of presentations were done, we then tried to do some work to classify and cluster the photographs. So that's where we used the printers. We printed out images and gave them to each of the photographers to use as a kind of a prop to remind them what was this picture about, and we asked them to try to cluster them on the wall, and then other people got engaged. And that was a really great discussion about themes and issues. In terms of what works and what doesn't work, we had experiences on both sides. The first time we tried to do this, we gave the pictures, the prints, to each photographer and asked them to go ahead and try and organize them, and it absolutely failed. It was chaos. And people completely lost sight of what was the purpose of the photograph, even that they themselves took. So if it was about family, but there happened to be a cow, that picture got nailed up on the wall with all the other pictures that had cows in them. And so we really lost the theme. In subsequent rounds, we did it in a much more sequential way, where each photographer, one by one, again presented the ideas behind their picture, sometimes informed, or always actually informed, by the discussion that had been had when we presented them. And then they would put them on the wall, and other people would actually discuss about that thematic clustering, and that was a really effective process. These are photographs made by people from the villages. Some of the important themes that came out, livestock really came out strongly. Everybody took pictures of their animals. They talked about how they were important to them as a source of income, as a source of food, as a source of savings in case there was an emergency, how they could sell an animal and cover the emergency medical costs or something like that. And there was also, especially in the more remote villages, there was really a strong kind of a sense of fondness for the animals, and especially some of the bullocks and things like that. Irrigation was really important, as you can see with that kind of a topography. Any kind of level cropping land is rare and precious, and so people that own it really value it, and people that don't have it really would like to have irrigated cropland. Roads is a big issue. A couple of the villages are accessible only on foot or motorcycle. Most of them are only accessible part of the year, not the entire year, and only one of the villages actually has an all-weather road. This photograph is about water and access to water, and the fact that we have to carry our water in these dirty jugs, and we'd really like to have more modern and hygienic facilities for water. Schools always came out as important, and the quality of the school buildings, never mind the teachers and the books and things, is extremely poor and limited in all of these villages. House quality in some of the villages, the concrete one is in the village that's road accessible. But everybody talked about how a real symbol of progress would be improved quality of housing. And they actually use a local classification system where a bamboo house with bamboo roof or some kind of a thatch roof is kind of the lowest quality basic. Anybody can build their own. To a wooden walled house with a tin roof is kind of a medium quality. And when you get into concrete, which is actually hotter and less comfortable but more prestigious, that's kind of the pinnacle of local expectations. Nature and environment came out as important, both for kind of aesthetic reasons and inherent value, as well as for the things that you can get from the natural environment. And some interesting things that came out about traditions and beliefs. And I put these two photographs in because they were made by this gentleman and his son, not something that they were actually planning to do, but a reenactment of how they prepare their tools and go to the forest and request permission from the spirits to clear a piece of forest and plant a crop. So again, it was something that we thought, Michelle and I, when we were going through these photographs, it was something we got from this approach that we wouldn't have got from a typical kind of a questionnaire or a survey type of thing. It allowed them, we asked them about traditional beliefs, and they actually went and reenacted, made the photographs, and were able to communicate much more about how they actually would do that than we ever would have learned if we had been asking a questionnaire or even using a focus group or a kind of an open-ended discussion technique. So this is the kind of thing I think that this tool can get at that some of the other methods that I've used are less effective at getting at. Non-timber forest products came out as important. This is broom grass. It's a wild plant that actually gets harvested and sold to make brooms out of. It ships off in big truckloads of, people bring their head loads or backpack loads to the road and sell to a trader by weight. And then it goes down to the capital and gets made into brooms, or some of it actually gets shipped to Vietnam or to China. This is a bark that gets used in the perfume industry. Seaweed. This is another kind of a bark, and there's more of these because they were important. Grubs, some kind of meat. I'm not even sure what that is. But this idea came out strongly in the photographs that the forest is important to us because it provides us with food, it provides us with materials that we use in our daily life, and it provides us with a source of income. And in many households, it will be the only source of cash income, which they need to pay school fees and buy uniforms and other things like that. We started with some analysis based on differences in gender of what were the things that came out strongest from these discussions and from the photographs. You can see housing comes out really important more for women than for men, but there's a pretty strong balance across the things. School, roads, livestock are the things that come out as being very important in people's minds about what they would like to see improved. And on the conservation side, there was this general sense of the value of nature and of forests and of rivers, and then a lot of the other things showed up more on the development side than on the conservation side. So what did we find, or what were the results overall? Well, people really want to protect natural resources for their inherent value and for their utility value. And there was some, I wouldn't say we can quantify it, but my sense was that in the more remote places, these ideas came out more strongly than especially in the village that was more accessible to the road. In that village, there was a much stronger sense of people wanted to find ways to earn money. They wanted to engage in the market economy, whereas people in the more remote places really had a stronger sense of relationship with the natural environment. But overall, everybody really wants to have better infrastructure. They want roads. They want cement houses. They especially want schools. They want electricity. Later on, after I'm finished the presentation, I'll just let some slides run and you'll see some photographs, including some really interesting, I hadn't seen it before, they make these small personal generating stations. They buy kind of a dynamo that has a propeller on it. They come from China. They're available for $50 or $60, and they build a little weir in the river and put this thing in there, and it makes enough electricity to run a light bulb in the house so the kids can study at night. But it's of course finicky. It doesn't always work. Depends on the water levels. And they call it electricity with tears because there's actually a lot of people get killed electrocuted working in the river when the thing breaks down or something goes wrong with it. It's not a very safe system. So it's another thing. Everybody sees the value of electricity. I saw many houses, well, a few, where there's a refrigerator sitting there in the hopes of someday having enough electricity to run it. Currently, it gets used for storing documents and family photos and things like that, but it's something that people really want to have. So they want these modern amenities and opportunities. Now, getting back to the idea of the monitoring tool, what we wanted was ultimately to come up with a few simple sorts of indicators that it would be easy to collect information, that would be comparable one village to another, and that would be comparable over time. So that at a low cost, you could visit a place once a year, collect this information, and hopefully be able to compare over time. From the photo voice exercise, these were some of the indicators that we proposed. And since then, we've adapted and refined these. But, and we organized them in terms of this idea of 5 types of capital. A livelihood is made up and can be measured in different ways, not just in financial terms, but in various aspects that make a livelihood. On the financial side, we thought that motorcycles were a really good indicator of wealth at the village scale. If you can put it in terms of per capita, you can then compare over time and over space. The idea being that it's a low enough threshold that many households can afford it, but not everybody can afford it. So if you have an increase over time, it gives you some kind of a reliable indicator that people are increasing their material wealth. House quality as well. This is what people will invest in when they get more money. Looking at the infrastructure, the built capital, using that terminology from this Sustainable Livelihoods framework, road quality and bridges are really important. Irrigated land, people are investing in it when they can. And so if there's flat land and there's water available, if they can invest in the diking and piping or however it's done, they can increase the area of irrigated land. So it's a good indicator. Drinking water availability. There's standpipes in a lot of villages. More and more people are now starting to get it delivered to the house. So we recommended that let's count how many houses actually have water delivered in a pipe. And then we'll also look at whether it's available year-round as an indicator of water availability. And of course, electricity. Then you get into some of the more difficult things like social capital. How do you measure that? And it certainly didn't show up very clearly in the photographs. But we asked people about things like what kind of social groups operate in the villages. And every village has a women's union. So we thought it might be useful to use that as an indicator. How strong, how well attended, how effective is that women's union? And I don't think we've still got that dialed into a way that's easily measurable and comparable. And the idea of cooperative labor, which is something that people do, they'll get together in a work party to rebuild the bridge when it gets taken out, to work on the community center, build the school. So we thought it would be useful to try and measure, if we had some kind of a minimum threshold, how many days per year, for example, do 10 or more people from the village work together on a community project. The idea of human capital, infant mortality, is really a useful one because it's universally used. We define it in the same way as the UN. We can measure it, we can compare it, and it's a really effective one. School enrollment, we suggested in the end 2. 1, most villages have school available up to about grade 3. So we said, let's measure the first indicator of school as how many kids who are eligible to complete grade 3 actually complete it, so on a percentage basis. And then it's a big jump to get to the next level. You have to go to another village, maybe even bill it in another village because it's so far away. So how many people, how many kids who are eligible? I think we decided to use grade 10, not finishing high school, but actually get into and complete partial schooling at the high school level. And then natural capital, we're looking at measures of forest quality, river quality, and livestock. herd size seems to be the easiest to measure on some kind of a comparable basis. But, sorry. So this is just things that we were able to suggest from our discussions, and then in other work we've gone about trying to refine these in a different way, and I hope I'll be able to present that to you at a later presentation. So what do we learn about photo voice as a tool? It's fun. People really liked it. I mean, it was really easy to get people engaged in the discussions because it was novel. They had a chance to learn something new, and they just plain enjoyed it. It was, unlike a lot of other kind of village level approaches that I've been involved with, this one just attracted people, and people who joined were, none of them left. We didn't have any attrition, and we had groups of people hanging around the building looking and watching and taking part in the, at least from outside. We got rich and high quality information. That example of the traditional approaches, I think, is a good one. This is one of the things that I'm working with Michelle on. We're working on a paper right now to try and think, are there different things we learned? Are there different kinds of things that we learned compared to other approaches that she used in her anthropological research in this area? There were a number of other things that have been done here. There was a village mapping exercise, there was a scenario modeling, and a number of other participatory exercises, one called participatory landscape analysis. And we compared, and we find that what we learned is more or less consistent. And I'm not sure that there's a lot that's really different, but we're still working on that. But it's consistent, and so that's encouraging. It stimulated a lot of really interesting discussions among people, with us, and with our colleagues later. I think the participants themselves learned new skills and gained confidence, and then we went to the next level. I mentioned that I would come back to this. We took a couple of the photographers from each village to a district level meeting that we were, as part of our bigger project, we're holding with government officials, and gave them the opportunity to present their village photographs to that meeting. And so these are people who, have not done any public speaking, and there they were standing in front of government officials in a very hierarchical society, presenting and very eloquently talking about the issues that their village had identified as being important, and with the photos to kind of back up their presentation. So that was great, and I think it really was effective at getting those ideas across to these government officials, some of whom would never ever go to a rural village like that, where you actually have to walk, where you have to get out of your car and travel on foot to the place. So they saw things that they might not otherwise have seen, but they heard ideas that they otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to. And so that was really an effective tool. So the advocacy side of the photo voice was also really good. We tried different group sizes. We had some big ones, we had some small ones. We thought that 12 to 14 worked pretty well, and we thought that it really worked well to separate by gender. It was different in different villages, different ethnic groups, different exposure kind of to the outside world changed the way these things work, the dynamics. But in some cases, we found that women were pretty quiet when the men were there in the group. So it was effective to separate them, at least for some of the discussions. Technique here, I'm just talking about the basic operation of the camera. As much as it was a big leap. So one lady, she told us she walked 4 hours to a place where she wanted to take some pictures. There was something she really wanted to show us, and she explained it to us later. It would have been better to have the pictures, but when we tried to upload the photos, it was empty, and she'd been pushing the on-off button and not the shutter release. So that was really a heartbreaker for her, and it would have been nice to have her pictures. So those kinds of small things, but there weren't many. I was impressed the way, I can't figure out how to use the remote control on my TV at home. These were people who had never used these things and were coming back with good pictures, saying what they wanted to say, and it was really good. The questions we tried, that list of questions I gave you is the result of several iterations and different tries. Some of them were more general, some of them were more abstract, and that didn't work at all. They had to be as concrete as possible in order to get a reasonable response from as many of the group as we could. Yeah, I mentioned this idea that when we got to the point of the discussions and the classification, it simply didn't work to set people loose and, and try and do it. It had to be done orderly, sequentially, one by one. And it, I think, was really effective anyway at stimulating everyone to concentrate on that idea, on that picture. What does it represent? And think about how does it fit into this overall discussion that we've been having. We gave people copies. We said we would print 2 large-size photographs for each household that participated, and that was really appreciated. People went off and took pictures of their families, and for many of them, the only pictures they would have of their families. So that was a nice thing. So overall, we thought that the whole approach, this photo voice tool, adds rich information. It facilitates the communication of ideas. It's really, I think, a good tool for understanding and incorporating local perceptions and beliefs into whatever you're working on. And overall, I think it's a useful way to improve project and program success. So that's it for the presentation. And what I'm going to do now, if you just give me a minute, I'm going to start a slideshow, which I won't narrate, but I'll just put it as background in case nobody has any questions. You'll have something to do. And these, is that it? Yeah. The first, I'm not sure, maybe 30 or 40 pictures, I would say, these are photos that were taken by people in the villages. This one, and you'll see a series that are all coming from local people. And then after that, there's a mixture of pictures that I took, some of them in the villages, and then some of them in Luang Prabang, which is the kind of regional, provincial capital, just to give you a sense of what the urban setting looks like as well. So that's it. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Brian. Thank you. This is amazing as well as timely for me as I'm sort of stepping into a project in a community next week and actually have been exploring the photo voice approach for some time. Although I'm doing a modified one, I haven't done it yet, so it always, I'm sure, will be constantly being modified. But I'm curious as to what would the community do with sort of the outcome now? Like, so you've gone through, they have these skills, these pictures. What will they, any sense of what they might do with sort of the outcome of sort of that event in their community?
I haven't thought so much about what they will do with the follow-up to the photo voice itself, but the bigger idea is to take these values and build them into the monitoring tool. And there I'm pretty happy with the way it's working. We've got the local government, the district government, anyway, on an annual basis collects information, basic statistics in all of the villages. We've got them to agree to add some questions to that annual collection of data that will complete this prototype monitoring tool that we've got. So we're going to get that kind of monitoring information on livelihood status at the village scale. And we've also put in place I think quite an interesting thing. We had in December the first round of something we called Kumban Day. Kumban is below the district, above the village. It's a cluster of villages, in this case 8 villages. And we've got them to organize an annual festival kind of. They have soccer tournaments and most beautiful vegetable tournament and crossbow tournament. But they also present and discuss the results of the monitoring. So they'll be looking at their own kind of childhood mortality, education, and all of these sorts of things, and looking at progress over time, and competing with each other on that basis. So it gets those ideas much more current into the discussion. And so I'm happy about that, and it gives them a way to communicate. There's also, the way Laos works is there's no government funding for anything, but they attract international development funding, and then they try and target it. So you've got international development projects. Right now there's a new one from a French volunteer agency that are going to be doing agricultural development in these very villages. They've agreed to use this monitoring tool as a part of their overall monitoring system. So I think we've been successful at getting people's ideas built into a system that will be used over time. As for the photo voice exercise itself, there's not a lot that will remain except people's, the results of the discussions and people's learning. But they haven't they haven't got the technology to reproduce the slideshow or anything like that. So, and we weren't able, I mean, I would have liked to have been able to leave the cameras behind, but we were using them in several places, so.
And then there's also the challenge of the renewable parts of the camera, such as batteries.
Yes, yeah. But in a Canadian context where people could keep the slideshow and use it as a presentation that in their advocacy or whatever, I think it would be easier to leave something tangible behind. Yeah.
Speaking of advocacy, is there an advocacy role that railroads can play in projects like this, where we give back rather than just draw out the resources, the research resources that we often are there to create or draw from? Is there a way that we can take this to the next step where we actually are able to get something back to them besides the experience itself?
Well, yeah, well, I think we are in this project. We've been able to take the ideas and represent them to the government. We've been able to get it built into this this kind of statistical collection system they have, but they didn't really use those statistics. They sent them up to higher levels of government and never really used them in their own analysis. So now I think, I'm not sure, but I think the wheels are in motion, that some of that information will actually be used in a way that will benefit people. And we've been able to advocate, I think, for more effective incorporation of local values into project design, at least within the district government where we've been most active and engaged. And then at higher levels, I mean, there's a lot of work going on to promote, first of all to recognize, in the work we're doing, to recognize the value of natural resources in rural livelihoods. There's a lot of safety net and subsistence use that doesn't get captured in typical statistics and then gets ignored. So in Cameroon, for example, they've created a new national park. They've prohibited people from going into the park for hunting, but that also makes it less economically viable to go into the park to collect non-timber forest products. And people have been made much worse off as a result of the creation of the national park. So the other thing that we're advocating is, first of all, recognizing those values and also using some of the tools that are available. There's a lot of participatory tools available for assessing local resource needs and uses, for example. So we're saying to international conservation organizations and development organizations, make sure you take that into account when you're doing your planning, because you might make people worse off when you think you're making them better off. Those kind of things we can do, but there's probably more, and I'd be happy to discuss. Yeah.
Do you have any future plans to put a voice in upcoming projects?
Yeah, we have planned to do it in Cameroon, and then and Greg Spira actually is in Cameroon. He's working with a QSO VSO position there, and so he'll actually be part of that exercise. And then we're planning to do a paper that describes the experience of Bolivia, northern Manitoba, Laos, and Cameroon, where he's done a couple of other exercises as well. I haven't got any projects planned right now where it's planned to use it, but I would definitely use it again because it's really effective. Yeah. And we've got a whole box of cameras.
Brian, can you talk about how difficult it is to take narrative and visual data and observational data and synthesize it in a journal article and get it published?
Yes. I don't know about getting it published.
Well, there are journals that are receptive to photo voice data.
I don't know yet, but I'm wondering, and if you have suggestions, we aren't even sure which journal to target, because we're aiming the paper right now, sort of like I aimed the presentation, as a combination between reporting the results but also reporting on the experience with the method. I think people will be interested in that experience with the method and what we learned from it. But I'm a bit stumped. I think we could have done a better job, but I don't quite know how to make it more analytical. I'd like to make it more analytical. And maybe that's something we could discuss about how would we structure this in a way that we'd be able to analyze that information more objectively. As it is, we can look at the themes, we can look at the classifications that people themselves did and that we participated in. But beyond that, it becomes quite difficult. And I thought that we might be able to, for example, compare less remote with more remote villages to see if we're getting a different set of themes and trends. But there's, of course, so many other variables that it's really hard to do that kind of thing with such a small sample size. But with a method like this, it's practically and cost-wise quite hard to do it on a much bigger scale. So I don't really have a good answer, but I think I can agree with you that it's going to be difficult.
It seems most amenable to a monograph or a small book, Brian, where the visual is sort of a natural,
Yeah,
a natural data.
yeah, 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 yeah. So now you're looking at Luang Prabang.
Brian, we're seeing Buddhist influence here as well.
Yeah, in the capital, and so Luang Prabang was the royal capital, and the French had a big presence there. It's kind of the center of Buddhism, but when you get further out into the rural areas, it's really still very much an animistic. There's very little influence of Buddhism in the villages where we were working. There's one monastery in the one village that's road accessible, and in the rest, none. And it's very much this idea of there's spirits in the rocks and the trees and the water, and there's a big push on. I should have mentioned actually that what the government is trying to do with their land use planning is move people out of the hills, especially the Hmong people, who there's a historic animosity between the Hmong and the government. The Hmong sided with the U.S. during the Vietnam War. They tend to be fairly independent. They usually live in more remote places. And so the government is trying to move them out of those remote places closer to the roadside, ostensibly to give better access to healthcare and schools and so on, but really so that they've got more control over them. And in the process, they're trying to reduce the amount of area that's under shifting cultivation. So there's a big pressure to move to sedentary agriculture. So one of the villages where we started researching actually got relocated during the course of the project, not the ones that we did here, but another one. And they told Michelle, I wasn't part of those discussions, but they said that they're really having trouble because the spirits in that area aren't their spirits, and they can't talk to them, they can't communicate with them, so they actually can't receive permission when they go to try to clear new land, and they're actually scared to go into some areas of the forest. So, that kind of thing that it's really hard to understand, but it's very, very real.
It's a fascinating study in itself.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd like to add to Bernard's comment about how this might be used in other contexts, in particular academic contexts, and wonder out loud why we think that the way that we would more or less capture the data and put it to its best use is really what's required in this situation. In other words, we're learning more and more about indigenous methodologies and other approaches that are becoming more equally valid in this whole world of scientific knowledge, that I really wonder whether we should be exporting our models, but rather looking at other potential processes and methods that might be very useful both to those who we're working with, or for that matter, indigenous communities that we're working with as well.
Okay, like, for example, what kinds of methods?
Well, drawing from the narrative piece, how do we begin to look at narrative as an inquiry piece? And there's been lots done on that. There's also been a fair amount done on visual anthropology and on other forms of trying to capture the very piece that we're looking to, rather than to put it into a format that would typically fit the very things that we used to do.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of potential there, but the thing we're up against is that there's all of these other powerful forces that one way or another you have to fit with. So these development projects, whether they come from an outside funding agency or the government, come with a certain way of doing things, and you have to find a way to make that local information fit into that model, because I think from our small platform, it's hard to do the other, to change the way they implement the big international development projects in a fundamental way. which would be required in order to incorporate that kind of learning and understanding. You can communicate the ideas, but I think you need to be able to ask questions in a way that fits the external intervention in order to inform it the way in the time span that's required to be useful. Yeah, but I'd like to discuss that with you more.
How much time were you able to spend in each of the villages when you were
Oh, yeah.
initiating the project?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Just the photo voice, you mean, or generally?
Well, so how did that timeline sort of work out for you?
Okay, so yeah,
Yeah,
so
I don't know where the division would be.
yeah, there's 3 nested projects. The biggest project is something called the Landscape Mosaics Project, which is taking place in 5 countries. It's looking at managing landscapes in a mosaic, so conservation areas, agricultural areas, other areas within forest concessions and so on. And so that project, the component in Laos has been on the ground it was a 3-year project funded by Swiss SDC. Then we linked our monitoring project to that project. That project was 3 years. And then the photo voice, the actual workshops were done in a matter of, the shortest one was probably 3 days and others were 5 days. But we had relations in all of those villages. I'd been to all of them a couple of times previously. Many of my colleagues that are working in these other activities had done different sorts of community workshops in all of them, and Michelle had been working in all of those villages. So we had, a background and relationships that we were able to build on. But we wanted to try a method that would be relatively rapid. So 3 days was about as short as you could do it, to have 3 iterations of photos and discussion and that. But we, in some places, tried leaving a longer time span between the photo presentations and discussions to give people more time to think about their pictures, to go travel to places that they wanted to go to. And that was another part of the kind of trial of the method, what worked and what didn't work.
How many communities or villages did you go to?
6.
And how did you say you had contacts in the villages before you went? I wondered how you selected participants with the voice once you got there.
We worked with every village has a village leader, a village headman,
Yeah.
and we would sit with them and talk about what we wanted to do, and they would sort of nominate people, and then we would approach them and ask if they were interested. Nobody declined.
Was there a collection of the photos left behind in the villages? Like, did each of them get like, what would happen with all your imagery now? Did you print it most or?
No, we didn't. We gave people their own kind of personal photographs, and then we have the electronic ones, but that's all.
What was the population of each village, roughly?
400 or 500.
Okay, hundreds, right?
Yeah, so these are small
Yeah.
villages.
Because you're getting, say, 40 people out of
Yeah. Yeah.
Typically, how many pictures did they each take?
Oh, it varied. Some people took less than 20 for each round. Some people came back with hundreds, and so we would organize it. The thing that seemed to work was we'd have an afternoon discussion. People would come in. We'd say we'd be available to upload photos from about 10 or 11, and then they would come in and we would upload all the photos and give people time to select. Then we'd have discussions in the afternoon, and then they were free to go do whatever else they had to do, including taking pictures. And then they'd start trickling back in again the next day around 10 or 11. And with some individuals, it could take 40 minutes to upload, go through, select the ones that they wanted to present. It's time-consuming business. Yeah.
Can you just talk more about how you selected the people who participated with the photo voice?
Oh, yeah. So
You talked about the representation of the group, but when you talk about as a percentage of the community, how how did you go about selecting the individuals?
Yeah, so we would go and we'd talk to the village head about what we wanted to do and the sort of the groups of people we wanted to be represented. And then he nominated, he would suggest people, and then we would approach them and invite them. Yeah. And we got a more or less balance along those lines that I said, except in one village we had one less woman than man, but overall it was pretty balanced.
I don't have a direct question, but a comment and an indirect question. The comment just relates to the importance of this work as it's seen internationally. That much of the work of the Center, Center for Livelihoods and Ecologies, is very well known internationally, and it's because of this type of activity or these kind of projects. And the history that Brian brought with him, and then the ongoing work of Tim and Wendy and Jenny and so on. And I think that it's great to see members of the broader Rural Roads community here, because it's very important that the center be positioned within the university, and those people who would like to participate in the center's work, there are opportunities to do so. The other thing, and I'll probably be putting you on the spot a little bit, Brian, but I read recently where one of your publications for the second time was 10 most cited in a particular domain. Could you just say what that is? It's not to embarrass you, but again, it's to put you on the spot. But again, it's to help position the importance of this research within Canada and how it's perceived both with the academic community and internationally.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mary. I agree. I think we're really looking for more opportunities to engage with colleagues at Royal Roads, and I think it can bring much more strength to the kind of work we do. We're really interested in the whole rural development side, but there's a big enterprise development aspect to that, and so we hope that linking with colleagues in Faculty of Management, Will's been working with us a lot, so that kind of relationship is going to be really good. And communication, I mean, there's all kinds of tourism, there's all kinds of opportunities, I think, for engaging, so I'm glad you raised the point. The other was it was kind of a nice surprise. World Development, which is an Elsevier publication, I didn't know that they did this, but they all of a sudden sent a certificate saying that, actually 2 publications in the same issue, I had two articles, were both in their top 10 cited articles over they, I guess, evaluated over a 5-year period, and so they were and so they send a certificate and a coffee mug. I usually carry them with me, I'd show you, but I didn't.
I know Ken's not here, but as I'm thinking around the development piece and what Mary's just noted, our Human Security and Peace Building program has one of its residencies somewhere.
Yes.
Typically it's been Uganda, and typically they've gone in and exercised their voice quite extensively, and we're looking for another location or candidates. Is there a way to link to, I mean, in that program, students are looking at the sort of the post-conflict period, in particular the development piece. And as you went through this presentation, there's many development pieces here that would be wonderful opportunities for those who want to work in developing nations to be able to do something.
Yeah.
And so if we're looking at involving the larger community here at Royal Roads, do you see the link between, or not the link, but do you see an opportunity where a residency could be held in Laos to do the follow-up to what you've started there? Mm-hmm. And to maybe build on and make other connections too, whether it's to Will's farm or whether it's to something else that we're involved in?
Yeah, definitely. We had one of a peace and conflict student, Eloise Poulos, was came and worked in our project in Cameroon. She spent 6 months last year, funded by the project, and then actually went back on her own, and she just recently returned to Canada. And we're working on a paper looking at that conflict situation, which is much more pronounced than in the Laos case. It actually got to the point where we had intended to do a photo voice workshop in October, but we couldn't go because of conflict in the villages, because of this thing I talked about, that people had been excluded from using resources that they had used previously. And they actually said, if anybody comes from the project, we'll kill them. And we thought we weren't sufficiently distinctive to be able to go safely. But it looks like things have calmed down. But it's an interesting one where there's conflict at several levels. You've got the conflict between the government and the conservation agency that's implementing this national park and the communities. But we also, unexpectedly, and it's been a bit of a hindrance, we thought that when we went and we could work with this conservation organization and offer them a tool, this monitoring tool that would be useful to them. They've got lots of explicit reference to their intentions to create positive development outcomes as well as conservation outcomes. And they claim to be making people better off as a result of their project. Now, we went to the villages and could see that it wasn't true at all. And the subsequent response from the people in the villages of threatening violence indicates that there's a problem, but they don't want to know. They really do not want to know. So Eloise ran it. She was there with the intention. Her role, her task was to try to work with these partners to find out what they wanted out of a monitoring tool and help to tailor it so that it would fit their needs. And they systematically rejected that offer. And at one point, they actually had a workshop, a 3-day workshop on monitoring, which they invited Eloise to present what she was doing, but excluded her from the rest of the discussion, so she never got to find out what was going on. And so one of the things that we're looking at in this, we're working on a paper on that, is this idea of avoidance of monitoring. And there's not very much in the literature. There's an awful lot of discussion about how important monitoring is. There's an awful lot of discussion about how it doesn't get done very well, and speculation that maybe that's because there aren't enough tools or people don't budget adequately or whatever. But I would say that there's also all kinds of personal professional as well as institutional professional reasons that people choose to not monitor properly. And that's a really interesting issue as well. But on your bigger question, yeah, I think there are opportunities for those kinds of links, and it would be fun to see if we could develop some.